Welcome viewers. On behalf of Iravati Research and Communication Center, this is your host Pratim Ranjan Bose. In this edition, we will discuss logistics connectivity issues in the Eastern Neighbourhood, comprising Eastern and Northeastern India and the neighbouring economies of Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Myanmar, etc. I have with me Dr. Pritam Banerjee, a logistics specialist and consultant at Asian Development Bank. Pritam is based out of Delhi. He has vast experience in the sector and was Senior Director, South Asia, Deutsche Post, DHL Group. My second guest is Mr. Biswajit Bhattacharya from Guwahati in Assam. Biswajit has vast experience in policy advocacy. He is Senior Director of the Apex Chamber, FICCI, and spearheads the operations in Northeast India. As you are aware, Northeast region of the country comprising 8 states is witnessing, and roughly 8% of India's geography, is witnessing unprecedented infrastructure development. Arunachal Pradesh, which was not in the civil aviation map for 7 decades since independence, got its first airport at Pasighat in 2017. This was followed by civil airports at Teju and Jiro. On November 19, 2022, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated the 640 crore greenfield Doni Polo Airport near the state capital, Itanagar. This is the 4th operational airport in Arunachal Pradesh and 16th in Northeastern region. Between August 2017 and August 2022, that is 5 years, the region witnessed 36% rise in number of flights. This is the highest increase in India. The second best is around 10%. With this, my first question is to Biswajit, the man on the ground. Biswajit, we can feel the change in connectivity paradigm in the Northeast. To what extent, I mean, from the data, to what extent it is changing life and business there? AFSPA is largely withdrawn now from the region, indicating peaceful political atmosphere. What kind of opportunities is it opening for the business? And I think the immediate opportunity lies with tourism. Over to you, Biswajit.
Yeah, that's a very good question. You see, over the last decade or so, the biggest change, the most important change that we can see in the region is in the outlook, changing outlook of people, and also the changing focus from a subsistence-based economy, which the state governments were also quite attuned to. The focus is changing very fast towards graduating to a higher level of economic activities. For one thing, connectivity has made it possible for companies and investors from across the country to actually look at the Northeast as a viable investment destination. Today, if we look at the states of Assam, Sikkim, Tripura, Meghalaya, and some of the other states as well, virtually every Indian company, a big Indian company in the pharmaceutical FMCG space has its presence here. Other sectors are also coming in. But
I think Guwahati has emerged as a logistics hub for.
Yes, it has emerged as a logistics hub, and in fact, now it is literally impossible for any company to find land in the vicinity of Guwahati. And the good thing is now companies are actually looking at locations farther afield, like Tejpur, Upper Assam, even in Tripura. So that is the biggest change which has come about. And also the outlook of the people has changed in terms of, because people are traveling more often, it's become easier to travel. Northeast has always had a bunch of people going out for education, for treatment, etc. But earlier it was confined to a very small set of people who were either academically very brilliant or who had the financial wherewithal. Today we see people who are not as brilliant academically, or who do not have that much of a financial wherewithal, also traveling outside the Northeast for education, for employment, and many of those people are coming back and starting enterprises here.
The earlier the flow was out of necessity, bare necessity, that was not there.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
right now,
In
probably
fact,
it's not there. The cancer patients have facilities over there.
Yes, in fact, Tata Medical has got not one center. There were centers across Assam now, and the number of people traveling outside for treatment or to access medical facilities has come down drastically.
That we can
Uh,
see here in
More
Calcutta.
and more people are treated here, and the number of people traveling outside for better employment opportunities, for education, etc., has increased manifold. So, which to my mind is very positive. Many of these people who have found employment outside the region have also come back and have started businesses. We can see a virtual startup revolution going on in the region, maybe not in the scale of Bangalore or even Calcutta, but given that we started at a very low base, I think it's a revolution of sorts that is going on in the region.
Of course, I
Uh,
think I think there are a couple of Northeast dedicated funds. I'm not talking about the government initiatives, but the angel investors
yes,
funds.
yes, there are quite a few, and more people are showing interest. For example, recently this year, during the World Expo in Dubai, the Northeast states had participated there. And for the first time after the expo, we had people, angel investors from Dubai, coming and visiting the region, exploring as to whether they can start investing in the region, what are the opportunities available. We had big supermarket chains coming into the region, looking at sourcing from the region, and some of them have started sourcing from the region.
Right. I remember
So,
2019 Lulu Group came. Don't know
yes,
whether it
yes.
materialized into permanent sourcing, but I saw them coming.
Now it is sort of permanent. They are sourcing almost regularly certain products from the Northeast. So
Okay.
those are massive changes. If you look at Northeast 10 years back and the situation now, these are massive changes, and all this has become possible only because of improved connectivity. And
Okay.
the other most important change is in the outlook of the state governments themselves, because till now the state governments were focusing on welfare measures, subsistence economy, and all that. Increasingly, the focus is shifting towards investments, attracting trade, promoting tourism. I think that is the most important change. So I would like to say that we are probably building a good base for the future.
Right. In tourism, you said, I'm a little interested, so we can come back again. In tourism, Northeast was restricted to Shillong and Kaziranga. Mostly, this was the map. Arunachal
Yes.
Pradesh had very few visitors. I just saw that Arunachal Pradesh is further trying to ease the system of inner line permits and etc. Electronic permits and etc. They have already eased, and they are trying to. So we would like to hear from you what kind of movement that you see on ground in tapping this potential. I mean, that region has immense potential in tourism is probably being said for 7 decades, but it never materialized, excepting in Shillong and. So
Yes.
with this, we can move over to uh, Pritam. Pritam, here is a very interesting puzzle. 4 airports in Arunachal in flat 5 years. Doni Polo Airport was built in flat 3 years since Prime Minister Modi laid the foundation stone in 2019. Compare these with 600 megawatt Kameng hydropower station of NIPCO. Manmohan Singh government cleared this hydropower project in December 2004 at an estimated cost of roughly 2,500 crore. It was supposed to be completed in 5 years. It was finally dedicated to the nation on November 19, 2022 by Prime Minister Modi. After 18 years and at a final cost of more than threefold high, that is 8,500 crore roughly. What has changed, or if anything has changed in India's policy implementation apparatus? How come the same government agencies, contractors suddenly became so efficient? What lagged in the past? Over to you, Pritam.
Thank you very much, Pratim. Before I start, I'd just like to make a disclaimer that Standard disclaimer that the views are personal and not reflective of any institutions that I'm affiliated with. Uh, I would like to point to three main changes that are responsible for expeditious implementation of infrastructure projects in general. And Pratimda, if I may underline that this is true for the entire country. Yes, in Northeast, perhaps the results are more stark, but you would have observed that this is true largely for India as a whole, not just restricted to the Northeast.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So the three big reasons that need, in my mind, which are responsible for it. Number one, there is definitely an institutional change in terms of the administrative apparatus, that a very strong regular monitoring mechanism has been set up, which is followed through from the very top. And what that let me underline what that means. It basically means that there is a dedicated management information system which tracks the progress of these projects from the time the dedicated project and the detailed project report is developed, the DPR stage as we call it, right to its execution. And any delay in the different milestones for the project, the concerned officials are constantly pulled up. They are asked for reasons. Accountability is very well established down the line. So this is an administrative change. It has been taken very seriously because this current government really believes in delivering projects in time, and they've set up this administrative apparatus within the whole system to reflect this priority, and this is working. The second, I think, very important thing that is there is that the top leadership publicly makes, and you would have noticed this, announcements about certain projects, and by typically when it will be done. So when the prime minister of the
Yes,
country goes and says,
that's a very, very stark change in whole approach.
absolutely. So when the prime minister of the country goes and says, I'm going to connect every single state capital in Northeast by rail by such and such date, that becomes a political commitment which the party wants to be and the administration wants to be accountable to. And therefore, even the people who are on the junior levels of the implementation, they understand that this announcement has been made and this has to be taken seriously, because if it isn't taken seriously, there will be repercussions for this. The third, I think, very, very, very interesting, and this is on the ground level, is that a system of incentives or disincentives, or a system of carrots and sticks, if you would have it, has been created. Because that, as you rightly pointed out, the PSU entities implementing these projects are largely the same, but
Same,
it's not
same airport
the
authority,
same
name.
NHIDCL, NHAI, all of the same Indian Railways, IRCON. But the point remains that we always have known that the PSU entities themselves don't do the groundwork. It is subcontracted out to a number of private contractors, large and small, depending on the project. Now, a very interesting set of incentives in terms of timely or before time completion, of course, with some quality parameters in place. On the flip side of it, a very systematic system of disincentives of late delivery has been set up. But some people will argue that some of this was already in place in pieces, though it is in a much more comprehensive, organized manner now. None of this is very new. So what is the difference then? Well, the answer to that is that these contractors could get away with lobbying. So, for example, if I was a contractor and I had in my contractual agreement that beyond a certain date delivery would cost me certain penalty per day or whatever the conditions might have been, I will be able to manage the system to not have this part of the contract implemented. That comfort has been taken away very clearly by very clear administrative signal that no matter what happens, you fail to meet the contractual requirement, then the penalties will kick in. It's a credible threat now. It is not a just something on paper, and that has worked wonders on the ground. So I think combination of these three elements, we are seeing the results across the country. Of course, in the Northeast most starkly.
I totally agree with whatever Pritam has said. One very specific thing which is visible, at least in Assam, because in Assam, the state government is also implementing a lot of projects, is that apart from holding the contractors accountable, the state government is also making sure that payments are released well in time so that the cash flow of the contractors is not affected. And that is helping contractors work fast, complete projects well before the scheduled time.
Yeah, so
Yes,
what
yes.
essentially Biswajit is arguing is there is a structural change. One.
Yes.
I think I would also like to know from Pritam is that say, for example, earlier road projects, highway projects were given with 50% land acquisition, right? The projects were started off. Now they don't. They ensure that land is there, and so that creates that brings in the political economy into, make the political economy committed to it. And third issue I noticed is a political economic issue, for example, which you briefly mentioned, is that, for example, I know about the rail project between to Agartala, right? It was a national project, mind you, so the fund was not a problem, but it was same was Boggyville, it was a national project, but it didn't progress. So I know here a particular lobby of contractors were playing the game because there were a lot of transporters were involved, road transporters, who didn't want to lose their business, and they were delaying, ensuring that this project is getting delayed. So a political economy was in. So now we see three things. One, the federal government is ensuring that the political economy remains committed to projects. They don't do such things. I don't know how, you may be knowing it better. Second is there may be some structural changes in the system wherefrom the stick is getting more effective. Otherwise, why the previous prime ministers couldn't enforce that? I'm sure all prime ministers wanted projects to be completed in time.
So, Pratim, if I may just take very briefly on this, let's not go out on a limb and say that all projects, we have 100% land acquisition. Yes, a large number of projects we do, but it is still not entirely true because NHAI, for example, would be able to, but many other projects they don't have that luxury. So to that extent, and we know that one of the main objectives of the Prime Minister's Gati Shakti master planning process is essentially to drive much more of these kind of key performance indicators, right? To ensure that not only do you have all the land that you need, but also all the approvals, because many cases what happens is that depending on the type of land, forest
Right.
land, coastal zone, and all of that, these get stuck between departments. So land has been acquired, but the appropriate permissions, approvals have not come. So these things are still work in progress. You're absolutely right. It's much better than before. Now, this brings us back to the more pertinent question that you asked in terms of the political economy, where certain lobbies, either the contractor lobbies were, impediment, or in some cases they were, let's say, extra state actors, especially in the Northeast. You know this much better than anybody else, who had a role to play. The question is, how is the central government managing it? Very honestly, I don't have a good answer of comparison. What was not working before as to what was working now. All I can say is that what seems to be working is that the state has certain levers in its arsenal to ensure that these things get done. And the current administration is using those levers. To why the previous administrations did not used to use the levers is somebody with more information on how the local political economy worked would be able to give a better answer. But sitting from for somebody like me sitting in the nation's capital, working as part of projects, etc., so having a more distant view, we saw the levers not working. Nobody could give us a good answer why, despite the state having those levers, they don't work. Many confused answers used to come. We now know they are working. Maybe somebody like Biswajit or you would be able to give a better idea that why the very same levers, because those powers and those levers are available, were available then and available today, why they're being used up, effectively today, and why they were not being used before, is perhaps people like you have a better understanding.
Good ball passing. So no, I mean, yes, we do have very kind of guesses. Well, one thing is very definitely clear, that the whatever we argue about centralization of power and etc., it works. It works in terms of project implementation, that we saw. So back to Biswajit. Biswajit, Northeast is now having decent infra, as we discussed, and inter-region, both in terms of intra as well as intra-regional connectivity. One of the primary developmental goals of this region were to act as a bridge to ASEAN through Myanmar and increase trade opportunities with Bangladesh, which shares nearly 2,000-kilometer border with the region. What is happening in this direction? I mean, from data, we don't get as, we don't see that much of an upside, but there may be potential that is opening up, and people might be at work, as you said in your initial comments.
Okay. So, well, as far as the actist policy of the government of India is concerned, I think the Northeast is a very critical part of the entire actist initiative. Having said that, I think we should be realistic in the sense that while we are looking at connecting via Myanmar with ASEAN, etc., we are also looking at connecting via Bangladesh, the BBI and motor vehicle agreement, etc. Now, if we look at the ASEAN, for example, for a manufacturer who has a plant in Visakhapatnam versus a manufacturer who has a plant in, say, Guwahati, I think the plant in Visakhapatnam is always going to have a cost advantage. because they have access to the sea. Now, even if we were to assume that we get seamless access to the sea via Chittagong, Mongla, etc., the transshipment costs, etc., will be substantial. So I think as if we are thinking in terms of competing with people sitting in Visakhapatnam or in Chennai or in Bombay for that matter, or in Calcutta on transportation costs, is not realistic. What is realistic, however, is if we are looking at Bangladesh as a market, because Bangladesh is practically surrounded by the Northeast. Of course, Bengal comes in. But then I think that is where a lot of things could happen. And one good example is the border trade centers that has been set up in the India-Bangladesh border. Most of the border trade centers are doing exceedingly well.
You're talking about border huts.
Border huts, yes, border huts. Within their limited scope that was given to them, I think they're doing exceedingly well. And it is time we should look at expanding the scope of these border huts to become proper border economic zones. I think that is one idea which we need to start exploring. As far as connectivity with ASEAN, Myanmar, etc. is concerned, what it can help us do is probably give a boost to service sector. Tourism, for example, there are lots of tourists who are coming to Southeast Asia, Thailand particularly. Many of these tourists could have, many of these tourists actually go to Bhutan also, for example, leaping over Northeast. And there are complementarities, be it Buddhism, be it wildlife. Thailand, for example, has a lot of sea, it has a lot of culture, it has a lot of Buddhism, but it does not have high mountains, which the Northeast has.
If I'm allowed to interject you, there are, when we say trade opportunities, it shouldn't necessarily be, we assume that there is the sea route and the bulk of the trade with, say, ASEAN. Let's put ASEAN, forget Myanmar. I mean, of course, sea route has an advantage, and the production zones, you don't expect the big factories coming to Guwahati or up in the hill in Imphal or somewhere else. So that's understood. But what is also, there are pocket opportunities available. For example, India exports 2 megawatt of electricity to Tamu,
Yes.
Myanmar.
Yes.
Now Myanmar is suffering from a serious scarcity of electricity. So why can't
Yes,
this electricity?
I'm coming to that.
Second is we started a grease trade with Myanmar through Tamu. And without thinking much, we just took the truck, and then we found that the truck costs us too much. So Indian Oil now has a plan to lay a pipeline. So what is happening to that pipeline? And similarly, on the Bangladesh side, when we see that all the trade routes are getting really being made over. I was recently at this place, Doki. So that road is getting huge, wide road. And it was earlier probably a pre-World War road that was. So whether we can see this much of, that Doki is emerging as a major trade point.
Yes.
What do you?
See, I think it is, while it is important that connectivity linkages are built, I think it is important that we identify the areas of core competence. The reason I mentioned the transportation disadvantage that the Northeast has, despite having good roads which are coming up, is that we need to focus on areas of core competence. We cannot assume that big factories from other parts of the country are going to shift here. Now, if you look at areas of core competence, you mentioned power. Northeast is projected to have the potential of over 60,000 megawatts of hydropower, etc. Now, if tomorrow this power starts getting generated in the region, how do we evacuate it? The chicken snack will not allow us to evacuate so much power through it. It's a very densely populated area, and it is already, I think, as far as power lines are concerned, that particular area is already congested. So we'll have to evacuate the power through these countries. Either we have to sell it to Bangladesh, or we have to sell it to Myanmar, which, as you rightly said, has a huge power deficit.
Yeah, look at Kameng. It's 600 megawatt. Even if we assume, say, a PLF of say 50%, right? So 300 megawatt.
Yes.
Now the peak electricity demand of Arunachal Pradesh is only 120 megawatt. Right? You have huge excesses in the system.
Yes. I think for the next few years, Assam is going to consume most of the surplus.
Okay.
But that is only for the next few years. Beyond that, we will have a problem of plenty, and the power will need to be evacuated. So yes, power is one area. Then again, there are sectors like bamboo. For example, in Bangladesh, there are some paper mills in Bangladesh which are running on bamboo from Mizoram, which is actually getting exported through an informal process. It is just bamboo rafts are just thrown into the river and it floats down, and so those sort of things. And then also, we have to look at, for example, Bangladesh has a huge garment industry, which is actually probably responsible to a great extent for the country's recent economic boom. The Northeast has huge amount of handlooms, for example, some unique fabrics, muga, etc. So can we find some linkages between the garment industry in Bangladesh and this? Assam has the gas cracker project, which produces plastic granules. Bangladesh
and the whole region is going to get natural gas.
Yes.
The whole region.
Yes.
All states.
Yes. So can we look at the plastic industry in Bangladesh? It's huge. Can we look at the plastic industries from Bangladesh importing the plastic granules, the raw material from Assam, for example? So I think it's very important to pinpoint those areas where the region has core competence. Only then.
I think petrochemicals will have good, because the region's capacity is getting doubled. And it has to sell. Of course, the nearest market is Bangladesh. I mean, it cannot just bring it down to another Bihar or Uttar Pradesh.
Right.
So
and also service sector. You see, tourism is one, but apart from tourism, Myanmar, you see,
so what is happening to tourism? What is happening to tourism? Tourism is of different kinds. I mean, say medical tourism. Are you getting is Guwahati, Imphal, for example, on simply private initiative? It came up as a center, right? So how it is emerging? Are you getting is Guwahati getting good number of now patients from Bangladesh? is
No, not yet. Not yet. Not yet.
okay.
Not yet. I think it is primarily a question of these private institutions, etc., going and marketing themselves in Bangladesh, because places like Vellore and Chennai are already well marketed. And the reason these institutions are not yet going and marketing themselves in Bangladesh is that they are not being able to fulfill the local demand yet.
Exactly. Huge domestic demand.
So, huge domestic demand. A lot of people who were traveling outside the region are now getting treated here. So I think there is, we'll have this situation for the next few years where
right. And
people will try to
in regular leisure tourism, Meghalaya is almost saturated, right?
yes,
But
you see, in tourism, something.
what about other states?
Yeah, as far as Meghalaya is concerned, it is saturated, but unfortunately, I think Meghalaya has gone wrong somewhere. In the sense, it is getting too many tourists who do not spend much in the state.
Exactly.
So, some of the states, like Arunachal Pradesh, for example, is taking steps in the right direction. They are marketing themselves as a niche destination. So we find people, on the one hand, we find people from the Bollywood, the who's who of Bollywood traveling to Arunachal Pradesh, going and staying in very small niche resorts.
All right, so just four points over there. I think slight. I agree with what Biswajit is saying. I just have to make this point that Biswajit, the investment is at the end of the day a factor for private entrepreneurs to consider all the points that you mentioned, right? So in today's world, it will be the entrepreneurs who will be making those calls, and they'll be taking into factor all of the cost elements and distance. Couple of very quick points on logistics networks. Distances always don't define costs. So for example, if I have a large consumption market, which we have in Northeast today, if you have trucks coming in, you have to go back empty, they will charge you a fraction of the cost to go back, pick up cargo. So then your outbound movement from Northeast becomes extremely cheap, and we have pockets where we see this. Secondly, if you look at absolute distances between certain major clusters in Northeast India, so I look at the cluster around Guwahati in Assam and the cluster which we call the Borak Valley. So your Tripura, Silchar, that area. These are the two biggest concentrations of population. Their physical distance to the ports is not much, especially if I'm getting transit to Chittagong for the Borak Valley. For Guwahati, Borak Valley is not so significant. Yes, Dauki border will reduce the distance, but all in all, it is already pretty well connected with the rest of India. Third point, if its hinterlands did not have competitive advantages, you wouldn't have seen industrial clusters come up in places like Haryana, Punjab. You'll compare the absolute geographic distance of these locations with the ports is not significantly different from the major Northeast clusters. So I don't think that should be a mindset. Yeah, it's absolutely right that in the case of the Northeast, certain economies of scale, and which Pratim was pointing out, a lot of them are hill states. They're less, they're sparsely populated. There are other reasons that might be there for certain sectors to not come up. Environmental protection, prioritization would be another reason. But let us not try and say that Northeast is limited to this. There are so many examples of countries specializing or sub-regions specializing in sectors which nobody thought that they could do 5 years ago, and they have. Look at what has happened in certain mountainous parts of Vietnam today. They have seen the migration of factories from China, which nobody would have thought Vietnamese would excel in a decade ago. So let us not limit the ambition of the region by saying, it's poorly connected compared to Visakhapatnam, etc. That's my personal point of view. Secondly, I think very, very important factor here, when you mention tourism, I think there is a huge, and it's for people of our generation to realize this, that tourism, the way it is being done today, and increasingly the way it will be done today, is very different from the way we used to consume tourism services. There's a huge social media driven aspect over here, which thrives on uniqueness. It's a huge demographic of people below 35, 30 who would go to a more less visited place, despite the fact that the infrastructure might not be so good. And you see ample evidence if you visit social media, and a lot of it is happening in the Northeast. And I think it's for, of course, film star endorsements, etc., are equally important. But what I see a lot if you go to social media, is that a lot of northeastern youngsters who have living in Gurgaon or Pune or Mumbai, who know their counterparts, the same age group counterparts in other parts of India, they are going back and through social media developing these kind of entrepreneurial networks to get tourists to come and visit into their places. And this is now under the radar. You will see this explode, and I see Northeast doing very well because of that. The third point on the issue that we were discussing on the energy, I think very valid points. But I think the way you will be looking at the energy trade will be a combination of transit through Bangladesh, transit through the chicken's neck, because the technologies to now develop grids have improved tremendously. So this question of congestion is in my mind a mare's nest. You can improve upon that infrastructure very easily. If it needs to come through the chicken's neck, it will come through the chicken's neck. If the shorter route or the more economical route is to bring it through Bangladesh and other, it will come through that. The question is that this whole concept of the regional grid that we have been discussing, which includes from Bhutan, the excess that you can get from Bhutan, potentially from Nepal and Northeast, and bring it to the demand centers. And the demand centers are both rest of India, but specifically northern and eastern India and Bangladesh. That's where the demand largely is. That is something which is a very important political achievable. I think the ball is in very much to an extent in India's court today, and we have favorable conditions to drive this with our neighbors. Of course, when you look at Myanmar, etc., we do have an issue now, with the political situation, but hopefully that will improve. So that's my bit on that, Pratim. Thank you for giving me the time.
My understanding is that the regional grid will or should take a little time because there are many other considerations. You need matured players to join the race. You don't need it scramble because of the security aspects related to that. This is what my understanding, having tracked that particular sector. But second thing is, see, even if we just remove the term of regional grid, already we have trade relations, both ways trade relations with Nepal, electricity, and one-way trade relations with Bangladesh and Bhutan. Okay, it's very easy to convert this. Suppose I'm saying geographically, if yes, you don't, let me put it this way. Why put all the eggs into that chicken's neck? Instead, suppose you are injecting power to Bangladesh through one particular node, and Bangladesh is exporting you power through another node. If you remember, in 1994, Narasimha Rao proposed this same barter trade agreement with both Bangladesh and Pakistan. In a way, whatever you were saying about the regional grid, that will actually come. That is coming very much. So let's go to the last part.
If I may just come in with a small clarification. You see, when I say that we focus on areas of core competence, I did not mean to say that limit to these areas in the Northeast. What I meant was, we have had some of these connectivities for decades now. At least with Bangladesh, we have had some connectivity. At least theoretically with Myanmar, we have connectivity. But we have not progressed beyond connectivity till today. And if we introspect on what are the reasons, the reason probably, to my mind, is that the focus was too much on the manufacturing sector. Why the region does not have a core competence. You might come up with something very innovative in future. And manufacturing might take off in the region, and you might actually sell goods to Southeast Asia. But at this point in time, it is very important to succeed somewhere. And to succeed somewhere, I think we must focus on the low-hanging fruits, which are the areas of core competence, which is services, which is things like bamboo, which is things like, handloom, handicrafts, and all that. So I think it's very important to succeed somewhere.
I think what Biswajit is trying to point out, I have seen this very closely. I did a study, and he was there in 2019. See, what happened was they replicated the very operational format of a factory in, say, Visakhapatnam to Guwahati or some other place. Now, this is where the problem cropped up again. But as you were saying that it is this distance is not sacrosanct and it opens up new opportunities. So I saw one FMCG company that was basically earning its profit delta by tapping on that reverse truck movement, because for them otherwise it was a completely loss-making proposition, because they came there by virtue of the incentive scheme. So they import the material through Bombay, bring it to Guwahati, and from Guwahati they send it to the rest of the country. So there is a problem with the model. Everyone has put up assuming that nothing can be done out of this place. If you give me incentive, I'll come and I'll go. So that is where the problem is. Now something original has to come out of that place, and many things are happening with the startups. You know, this agri products startups. So they are doing some good job. Anyway,
No,
so
my problem is with the whole idea that incentivization. I think what I was saying is
Yes,
that it's
even
private
I have a
sector
problem.
driven. And do
exactly.
it, let the private sector do it. You know, you let them decide what the factors of production are, and based on that, they will take a call. And of course, where there are low-hanging fruits and if there is opportunity, they will invest in that. There is no doubt on my mind that they will.
Absolutely, absolutely.